Welcome to One on One. Today on the program, we'll be talking with Dr. Yemi Ogunbiyi, a media guru. He has served as the Managing Director of Daily Times of Nigeria and the Executive Director of the Guardian newspapers in charge of public affairs and marketing. He is the current chairman of Tanus Communications, a book publishing company. He is the Pro-Chancellor of the Obafemi Awolowo University. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you, Felicity. Thank you.
So, media, academia, advertising, what's the connection? Tell us a bit about your journey.
Well, first, when you make that distinction about my life, it's almost like a spurious one, because I started my career in academics, and then went on to help start what was called the Guardian newspapers at the beginning in 1983, and then went from there to head Daily Times, and then now I'm back. And when I was fired from my job at the Daily Times, I started my company called Tanus Communications. We started by doing some advertising, and with time we went into book publishing. And that's what I'm doing now. And the appointment as Pro-Chancellor is like a little icing on the cake, because don't forget, I was a university teacher myself at the same university. Indeed, I acted briefly as ASU secretary on Ife campus as a young 30-year-old when I came there to teach 40 years ago. So going back now as Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Council, it's like going back to my roots, as it were, and it's nice to do that. So for me, that distinction is a spurious one. Even as a media practitioner, I functioned as somebody who never left academics. And yet I realized that you had to map out a different strategy for media work. But the fact that I came from academia then armed me and prepared me for that challenge. And so the transition was smooth. But if you ask me now to compare, those are two different areas. Academics are different from media. Media work is quite different. And I'll give you one major difference. In media work, no 2 days are the same. I mean, you start a day like this morning, and then there's an earthquake somewhere outside Nigeria.
You can say that again.
You have to go and cover that. And so then the day after that, somebody dies somewhere. You have to. So things change every day. But in academics, it's you do your research over time. Things build up gradually. Nothing happens accidentally as you encounter me. So you have to get used to that. But my argument is that if you go from academia, as I did, to journalism, if you're well equipped as somebody who comes in from academics, I don't think you have a problem. It equips you soundly for the challenges of journalism. That's what I found.
Let me just reiterate that it's a pleasure having you in our studios today.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
Okay. Your years as a media practitioner.
Yes.
And I know when you started, I'm very sure we didn't have something like social media. But now there seems to be a blur between conventional media and social media. What are your thoughts about it? Are we playing our role as the media in light of what the social media has come to become?
Two things quickly. One is, I worry that conventional media, as we've known it, is in trouble. And I'm talking now not just of electronic media, but print journalism, for instance. If you look at the trend in Europe and America, print journalism is dying gradually. It's dying. Many media houses are beginning to fold up, mainly newspaper houses, because they have to contend with the immediacy of social media, of even electronic media, so that if, for instance, an earthquake happens today, there's something in Sudan, the president is overthrown today. Now, you would have carried it on your news. Social media would have carried it for me. So why do I need to buy a newspaper tomorrow morning to read about it? It becomes stale news. So newspaper houses have to try to cope with that trend. That's the problem. But there's even a more disturbing trend, and that is the social media bit has become even more challenging in the sense that in social media, everybody becomes a journalist, as it were. And whether it is false media, anybody can put anything on and it becomes viral, and there's a problem there. And so those standards which we reached for in conventional journalism are being abused every day by social media. If you call them hacks or practitioners, but either way, it's a whole new game. And what the conventional media has to do is to try and adjust to that reality, because for conventional media, it's a no-win situation. You're not going to win this battle, because for as long as the media, the access to media becomes something that's free to anybody, then you have no business pretending that what we have here, whether it is electronic media or newspaper houses, I don't need to read your comments in newspapers. If in fact the day before somebody has sent me details, no matter whether or not they are true or false, but in fact that the news is there at all, that so and so has just passed away, even if it's not true, that creates itself. We had a problem in the media, in journalism in the past. Many years ago in this country, we ran a story that Zik had died. Zik hadn't died, but somebody got us a false story. We ran with the story, said Zik had died. In fact, Zik was alive. Now, can you imagine if that was today? They will be telling you how Zik was buried. My poor man was still alive, who had actually died. So it's a problem. But either way, conventional media has to cope with the challenges posed by social media. It's a huge challenge.
So how can we evolve? And we see online, you see some newspapers, the Guardian, for instance, it's a very open, yes, they put out their support journalism. You have papers, all kinds, putting it out there, support journalism. Obviously, they have the challenge of maintaining viability, like you've rightly identified. So how can conventional media evolve, maybe merge social media in such a way that they remain viable? What are your projections?
It's happening already. Online versions of newspapers now exist, both in this country and abroad. What I think newspapers houses should do would be to begin themselves to create their own online services that would now then become ultimately some form of social media and provide all the services that you provide, so that you can't compete with the hacks, but you can compete with a form of social media that apes what we do in conventional media, so that the Guardian has its own newspaper, and when you have that online version of it, you can read it. It does more than that. It also provides you with other kinds of services online, which other social media houses will do, or platforms will do. So I think the thing to do is what we're beginning to see with media houses. They're beginning now to go beyond just print versions of their work, to also look for electronic versions of the same work, in the hope that that would now capture the same kind of... But the thing is that social media is an open field. It doesn't have restrictions. And so try hard as you may, you're not going to capture the same kind of crowd. I mean, that...
every time.
You can't. You can only try. So my fear, and I go back to my first point with you, that I suspect that print media as we know it, I'm not talking of your version of, but print media as we know it, and ultimately maybe electronic media houses, are going to be in trouble unless they can begin to adjust and do those things that hopefully can appeal to that young generation of persons who have their telephones with them, and becomes in fact their media. They're not interested in they don't need, all they need is that, yes. And so we have to try and find a way to aid that.
Just to take you back a bit to something you talked about, the time you put out a story about Zik dying.
Yes.
That is like 100 times, 100-fold as it is today. Fake news and the challenge that conventional media has, battling it as it were. Do you think we're towing the right path in addressing the issue of fake news? And do you think that the media has done enough to enlighten people on the dangers that,
First,
fake news poses?
The Zik story wasn't anything that was done maliciously.
Understood.
It was just plain error, as compared to what you have today. Today, people deliberately go out and put out a story knowing that story is fake and false. That's the difference between what happened. But then, as to what we can do to contain this heresy, it's a craze which we have to deal with. I'm not so sure we can win it. Because you're talking of a large. If anything goes viral, the other day when we had problems in Ife and some lecturer was accused of sexual harassment, before I heard about it here, my brother in the US called me to say, look, there's a story about this lecturer in your university who had done so and so. And I said, where did you hear it? He said, it's on the social media. Then I called the vice chancellor and he said, yes, it's true. So here was my brother living in Philadelphia who called me to tell me of an event that took place here in Nigeria. So I'm saying there are no borders here. You can't contain it. The best we can do is to, as much as possible, as conventional media, continue to do those things that are proper and right. Stick to the rules, conventions, do them properly. And let's not play, because I think beyond the point, the era of fake news will begin to diminish. People are going to recede through it. It will happen. It's going to happen. So let's stick to the conventions, do the right things all the time. Conventional media.
Okay, let me move the conversation a little to the journalistic ethics. The Freedom of Information Act. We battled, we went through a lot. Now it is an act that is available for us. Do you think that the Nigerian media, they're utilizing that Freedom of Information Act as should be?
I don't think so. I don't think that we as media are beginning to use that as we should do. I suspect that there's a level of... we have some fine journalists. I mean, let me say that here now, and some of the finest anywhere. You get them in this country. But many of our younger journalists are just plain lazy. The process of using that law requires quite some work. And it's not any work that hasn't been done or seen before. I mean, I looking back at my own days in the media, when I interviewed world leaders, I went to interview Mr. Gandhi, Shimon Peres, Benazir Bhutto. It took quite some planning to do. I would write letters to the embassy of Pakistan in Nigeria. I would write letters to our ambassador in Pakistan, Nigeria's ambassador there. I would talk to our foreign minister. It took quite some work. It didn't just happen that I suddenly showed up in Pakistan and then here I was with Benazir Bhutto. It took some 2 to 3 months of planning. That was a lot of work. I'm not seeing younger journalists today putting the kind of work we did putting in those days.
But you do know that it seems we have more media organizations these days, and then there's the issue of finance and basically funding for such projects. Some organizations might have challenge keeping up with a project that takes such a while, knowing the cost implications.
Very valid point, my dear. Yeah. When I went to interview Mr. Rajiv Gandhi in India, the Guardian couldn't afford my trip. So what did I do? I approached the Nigeria-India Friendly Association, some kind of association and I approached them and said, look, I'm going to do this in India. I need you to assist us. Get me a ticket to go to India. So I didn't approach the Guardian, but I got that interview. In the end, the Guardian, of course,
took the glory.
Took the glory. But I did it, and I didn't take a kobo from the Guardian. I agree with you there's a problem of funding. But I think also that our media houses, our young media guys, I see a lot of laziness. And I'm saying so knowing that some of the finest journalists you can find anywhere in our country, they're doing some work.
What could be the cause of this laziness that you mentioned?
It's not just in the media. We shouldn't hold the media accountable for this kind of...
I understand that, but specifically,
you're talking of a problem where you're as if saying to me, why do we find very young, very lazy medical doctors today? It's a general thing. It's general. I don't find that sense of commitment. It's a problem we have in our society, that our sense of values have become so perverted that it's affecting not just the ethics, but even the level of commitment, of performance, of putting yourselves out to offer service. It's dying, and that's a shame. And I'm ashamed to admit that you don't see that selflessness anymore in offering service. And so most of our younger guys who come in there want the easy way out. They want to become, they want to ride in a jeep the next day. They want to do, but whereas those things didn't matter. And I'm saying so. It's only how many years? 30 years ago. It wasn't as if I'm not talking about 50 years or 100. 30, 20 years ago in this country, we did some work, and there's evidence to show so. All I'm saying is, yes, media houses also have to do something about funding. Even those funding things you're talking of, we can also access funds from abroad. We're not doing enough as media owners to access funds that can help us do some of this work. We're not doing so. So the problem is not just with journalism, but the owners of media houses themselves ought to find a way to begin to access fundings from, and they exist. MacArthur Foundation, for instance, gives out funds to media houses. How many of our media houses are trying to access such funds from MacArthur Foundation? There are other funds from other parts of the world. We're not doing that. So it's yes, the journalists are to be blamed, but also I think the owners of the media. I don't want to mention any media houses, but I know some that I could tell you clearly here who are not doing what they should be doing to bring up the work they're saying to the Nigerian public.
Well, we're hopeful that we will learn, and you're still very much with us, so we'll come and tap from your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Let's move a little bit. You talked about the youths of this country.
Yes.
How concerned about Nigeria are you?
How do you mean? I have children, I have grandchildren who live in this country, and so I worry about how their future in this country, and I worry that I don't. Again, it might sound unfair. Young people aren't doing enough. Look at the last elections. Young people on social media followed each of those other candidates, not the PDP, the APC guys. They followed Mogalu, they followed them, Rotoi, they followed them on social media. On election day, how many votes did they get? The same young men and women who followed them on social media didn't go out to vote for them. So who's to blame? And what you're saying, again, boils down to what my earlier point, that young people aren't doing enough. It's a shame that in 2019, old men like Chibayo Adebanjo are the ones still fighting for Nigeria's growth and development. He's 90-something, it was 91 2 days ago. He's still fighting. Soyinka is 85. They're still talking about the country's future. Yes. Young men are just not out there. When Soyinka first came back to Nigeria and was arrested for allegedly holding up a radio station, he was not 30 years old. He was 20-something years old. Come on. And he did that. He went, so at least he was alleged to have done so.
This takes us back to something, just reminded me of a piece you wrote sometime in 2018, I think around July, about MK Abiola. It's actually a reproduction of something you wrote for him, considering what goes with his name when you talk about democracy in Nigeria. What are your thoughts about our democracy, where we are now? We just had an election, and we're still reeling from the impact of that. So on a general note, what are your thoughts about Nigeria's democracy as at 2019?
I think, my dear, it's still work in progress. We have to admit that there are still lapses here and there which we have to worry about. A lot more can be done. And hopefully as things evolve, hopefully they will get better. I'm not so sure whether the last elections were an improvement on the one before that, the one that was conducted by Jagger. I do not know. I don't have the facts before me. I'm only hoping that as we go through this process, things will get better. But something came across from these elections, and I hope that it's a lesson for everybody. Winning elections now will not be as easy as it was in the past. You saw what happened in some states where names like Saraki were toppled in what was supposed to be their comfort zones. Some places where people won the elections, it was tough for them in some places, as in Kano, for instance, as in, see what happened in Adamawa, for instance. Bindo's father was a big name in Adamawa politics, but he lost the elections, at least from what we... So there was one lesson here. It's not like old times when we just walked into a place and you won the elections. So now I think politicians have to begin to worry about how they perform once in office, knowing that 4 years after, people are going to go back there too. So whether or not the elections were rigged or not rigged, clearly you saw signs that the people's votes counted in some areas. And I think that's an improvement. It's not like it was the way it was, 20, 30 years ago. People are beginning to say, look, get your card, go and vote, and let it tell your own story. And we saw that. So even if it's just that alone, I think it's fair to say that something has happened. But as I said to you, it's work in progress. Things will evolve with time.
All right, let's go back to academia. Yes. I have so many questions to ask you about Nigeria, but with time constraints, so I'll just go straight to your role as somebody that's been in the education sector in this country. When you hear comments like Nigeria's education system has fallen, what comes to your mind? Have we truly fallen compared to, say, your time as a student and the early days that you spent in the university and as a teacher?
I think in certain respects, my days as a university student and as a teacher are different from today's realities. And in fairness, certain aspects of what we did then are just not there today. But then it's a different kind of age we live in now. Standards may appear to have fallen. I don't think it's as bad as people make of it. I think the problem we have here is that of funding. If you fund our system better than we're doing now, you get better results. If you go by the notion that some of the doctors we are training in Ife are going abroad and excelling abroad. So why is it that once we train them in Ife here, even up until a few years ago, they go through this training in Ife, then they go abroad and they become, big names. Obviously, therefore, something is right about the basic training, but we just don't have enough equipment for them to begin to show what they can do. And so once they're out there, they go across the US. So if you go by that alone, I think it's fair to say that, yeah, standards may have dropped in a few places, but we didn't have internet when I was an undergraduate. So students have access to far more information than we had then. A student can go online now and get access to all kinds of things. I know so much today about basic ailments of persons of my age by just going online and checking and reading all about it. That wasn't possible when I was a student myself. So in terms of the quality, things have happened. There are differences here and there. But it's also fair to say that if you fund the system better in our country, the results we're looking for will begin to happen. The problem is lack of funding. And that funding is basic to the way our university system was founded. We were founded like British universities where government funded universities. The American approach is different. The American system is different. So what we need to do is to begin to, there must be a little paradigm shift in the way we view university funding. If we do that, it will change a lot of things.
All right, before I let you go, you are 72. First off, you don't look it.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you. You're very kind.
Seriously, you don't look it.
Very kind.
Your years as a media person and somebody that has been there, done that, what advice do you have for young Nigerians, particularly journalists in this case? I happen to be one, so I'm very interested in it.
It's the same advice that I give any professional. Just do the right thing all the time. Do the right thing all the time. Don't cut corners. If you do the right thing all the time, it might take some time, but the results will show in the end. Don't try to cut corners. Don't try to play smart, but make sure that you're on the right and proper path. If you do that, you can't go wrong. I can say so for myself, but my career as an academic and my work in the media and my business today, do not cut corners. And that's the advice I'll give to anyone. And for me, it sums up the challenge we face in our country. Too many people want to cut corners. They want to do things. They want to run before they can run before they can walk. And that's the problem. I see that, with young people. And because people don't see enough security for themselves in their future, in whatever they do, whether as teachers or... So they're looking beyond and saying, when I retire, there's nothing for me here. And so why don't I just quickly... So that's why I say it's a much larger problem. You have to look at that global picture of how do we ensure that persons who work in whatever they do can ultimately, when they retire, get some kind of benefit. It's a big question you're asking me. That would take a whole series of interviews.
I know.
But my answer to that question is, do not cut corners. Just do things the right way.
Thank you very much, sir, for coming on One-on-One. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, my dear. Very kind of you. Thank you.
And that's it. Thank you for watching One-on-One today. More episodes here on Plus TV Africa. Stay tuned. you.